Welcome back to part 2 of our live training session here with our GT500 Mustang. In our last tutorial, we built the base file. This tutorial, we're going to fire up our engine and focus our attention on getting the engine to idle and making sure that things like our mass airflow are dialed in around our idle area and make sure the engine can turn off and turn back on again, start, fire up, and run properly so that we can move on to additional tuning tasks. Without further wait, let's jump in so we can check this out. Welcome back to our live training session here with our GT500 Mustang. In our last tutorial, we focused on creating our base file. We've uploaded it to our engine control module. This tutorial, we're focusing our attention on to getting the engine to fire up and run, using that base map as a reference point, and then modifying things that we need to in order to get the idle speed to where we want it to be at and get our fuel trims where they need to be at in order to have a successful startup and idle. We can't move forward with anything else in our calibration process until we've nailed down the idle control. Now, it should be a relatively simple process to calibrate our idle control tables. We've kept all of our RPM targets stock values in terms of where we want an engine to idle at. Even though we have aftermarket larger cams installed in the engine, it still should be able to hold and maintain a reasonable smooth idle speed. Now, we're going to see how this is all going to shape up here, but let's jump in and let's talk about some things we need to focus on for this training module. We're going to be working within the scanner. We're going to be working potentially within our Excel spreadsheet, depending on if we need to adjust our injector slopes. For example, we know we have our low and high slope data we can tweak and adjust. Now, technically speaking, we should be able to trust the injector data from injector dynamics. However, we're going to have to see what's going to happen with the MAF curve that we've imported for the JLT 123mm MAF, the intake assembly that we have here. We might find that that needs to be adjusted, and if we find our fueling becomes off, then we might have to tweak our low and high slope. So we're gonna have to see how this goes. We're only focused on our idle conditions. The next tutorial, we're gonna be focusing on off idle. So cruising, wide open throttle, we're gonna get into how to calibrate all that, also dealing with our O2 transport delay in the next training module. But for this training module, it's just gonna be purely startup, fuel, and tuning. Now, one thing about this, we don't have the airflow model nailed down. We don't know if the fuel model is 100%. We need to get the engine to fire up and run. We're on ethanol. So we have a couple variables here where we need to eliminate and get more into a steady state warmed up engine operation condition before we can really start to pick apart the fuel and airflow model to fix any kind of deviations or discrepancies that we're finding. That's going to require us to get the engine to fire up, hold and maintain somewhat of an idle, and get up to about 160, 180 degrees of coolant temperature so that we can start to deal with modifying and checking our fuel and airflow model to start to validate that, at least at idle conditions. So sometimes when we're firing it up, as long as our base map is relatively close, it might run a little rough, but it at least gets us to the point where we can fire up and get it to actually run and hold that idle. If you were just trying to start off with all the stock values, that wouldn't be possible, which is why we went through that the process in the last tutorial, going in and modifying everything in our base file. So that's where we're at right now. I've already flashed that at the last bit of that tutorial. At the end of the tutorial, we flashed the file to the engine control module, so we're all ready to go to actually fire it up. Let me go ahead and key on here real quick, just so I can prime the fuel pumps and make sure that that's all good to go so that we have adequate fuel pressure in the rails. Now, a couple things about this, and a couple things we're going to be taking a look at specifically in this training module. If we go in here to engine under idle, we're going to be taking a look at our airflow tables. Specifically, our airflow park neutral table is what we might need to adjust. We might need to bump up the airflow values, which is going to correlate to throttle plate opening to maintain and hold ourselves at desired idle speed. We've programmed the desired idle speed here under the RPM section to be at 750. These are the stock values. We're going to try to run with those. We might have to bump them up slightly higher than stock because we do have aftermarket cams in here, and it should idle relatively smooth with a 750 RPM target, but we'll have to see how that goes. But we're going to reference that point right here as a target, and we'll find the airflow that we're programming in our airflow tables. That's going to essentially tell the engine control module, hey, you need to open the throttle blade this much to allow this much airflow come in to maintain and hold a certain desired level of engine RPM and indirectly a certain level of engine torque to get the idle control where we want it to be at. We don't want it to idle at 1,000 RPM. We don't want it to idle at 500 RPM. So we need to go and recalibrate those airflow tables, and we might need to tweak and adjust the RPM target right here. Now, in addition to this, under airflow, we've imported our airflow versus voltage curve. This is something that I've imported from another GT500 running this intake. The value should be reasonably close, but they might need to be tweaked and adjusted in order to get things right in idle conditions. So we have our airflow model that's kind of an unknown at this point. We need to go and validate. And we can take a look at where our actual flow values, the mass airflow values, are showing us when we get the engine to fire off and hold a warm idle. We can see if it seems reasonable. We should be around 7 to 8 grams per second at around a 700 to 800 RPM speed of idle. If we're higher or lower than that, well, that means that our airflow model here is inaccurate. Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here, and you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.